Hey friends, we're about to run our annual course exploring vocation, mission, and calling in the birth chart at Astrology University, so I thought I'd give you a peek inside that course material by sharing a hot take lesson on the 4 main astrological keys to interpreting this important topic. I'll walk you through these 4 techniques and I'll name the parts that you're really going to want to focus on. Well, let's start by defining mission and vocation. Mission describes that feeling that a lot of us get that we have something to do, be, or express. And that feeling or image might feel really clear to us, like the kind that a lot of folks get even from a young age and that sticks with them for their whole life. But that's not the case for a lot of us. Sometimes we get a strong feeling that we're meant to do something, but we're not totally sure what that is. So we try different things, but maybe none of them feels quite right. And then stress builds because we feel like we're just not getting it. So this word mission describes that underlying feeling that we have something to contribute or to create or to manifest, whether we're clear about it or not. Vocation is pretty close to career in meaning. Oxford Dictionary defines vocation as a strong feeling of suitability for a particular career or occupation. Our mission may not pay the bills, but a career or vocation is often propelled by a sense of mission. And when it's not, we start to notice over time, especially if we're not expressing our mission in other areas of life. Now, we could say a whole lot more about mission, but you should have the general idea, enough so that we can start this conversation. Well, now let's take a look at the astrology techniques that can shed a lot of insight on this topic, and I'll start by naming them, and then I'll share a few thoughts about each one. If you've already had some basic astrology training, you've probably learned about the 4 angles, and one of those is the MC or midheaven. The MC is a great place to start exploring mission or career, and for a lot of people, your inquiry is going to just stop there. To fully explore the MC, you'll need to analyze the sign of the MC, the ruling planet of the MC, including its sign and house, any planetary aspects to the MC itself, as well as aspects to the ruling planet of the midheaven. Well, that's the basic foundation, but if you use additional tools like declination or asteroids, you can then add in those aspects, declination aspects, like the parallel or contraparallel. You can add in asteroids or other points for more nuanced information. And some of these extra tools are pretty interesting because they can give you really specific details that are resonant in a way that's unique to every person. But as a quick aside, if you're using a quadrant house system, the MC is the start of the 10th house. But if you're using whole sign or equal houses, the MC might be in a different house. And if that's the case, you're going to want to analyze the midheaven, the MC degree itself, and the house it's in, and also the 10th house. If you're new to astrology, I may have already lost you. If so, hit the basics with one of the many great courses online, including the ones we have at Astrology University. But stick with me because I'll wrap up this video with an inspiring example. Well, next up, we want to explore the sun. As the organizing principle of our psyche, we bring the sun wherever we go. The sun relates to drives and experiences that feel central to us, so they can often show up in someone's sense of mission or calling. The sun can describe that part of us that's on a journey toward self-realization or self-actualization. To analyze the sun, we'll start with its sign and house, and next we'll add in all of the aspects to the sun and any additional bodies or points in our toolkit. Sometimes just the house of the sun itself will give us some really important clues. For key number 3, we go on to the ascendant ruler, and that's the planet ruling the sign of your ascendant. For a long time in our tradition, this planet's been described as steering us into the important experiences in our life that might feel a little bit like our destiny. Analyzing this planet can give us additional career avenues to explore, or experiences or drives that feel important to us that might show up in our mission. We'll use the same approach as we do with the sun, and we'll analyze that planet's sign and house and its aspects. Finally, for key number 4, we'll look at the lunar nodes. These are 2 points in space defined by the movement of the moon, and they can speak to this feeling of destiny as well, or a sense of movement in a certain direction in life. The nodes can describe innate talents or energies that we're especially comfortable with, in addition to a sense of growth or where we might need to go. In other words, the experiences that help us grow, that help us move beyond where we are now, or help us deepen into the experience we're in with more awareness and intention. For a full analysis of the nodes, we'll look at both of those signs and how they relate to each other as a polarity. We'll look at the houses the nodes are in, and we'll also analyze the planets ruling the north and south nodes and their aspects. And if you're thinking, wow, that's a lot, you're right. The good news is that any one of these techniques might tell most of the story, and while the others are important, you don't necessarily need to try to make every single one of these keys and all of their parts fit into your idea of mission. Now, they are going to show up in your psyche and in your life, but they might show up in other contexts. Still, over time, it might be worth exploring all of them at some point, reflecting on your sense of calling, mission, or destiny, or just your own growth for some insight into any of these topics. In addition to the 4 keys, you'll want to take in any dominant aspect pattern in the chart, like a yod or a stellium or a T-square, because these can take up a lot of our attention and effort, and in the process, that focus could also feed into our mission. The yod itself may especially speak to mission. In Karen Hamaker-Zontak's book on this interesting aspect pattern, she describes the yod as carrying a strong feeling of drive to do something with the planet that's at the apex of the yod. Now, this planet might describe a feeling of compulsion or an inner need that we can't shake until we address it. And then she says, if we do get to some feeling of satisfaction with that drive, that as soon as we're done, another project just shows up in its place. Well, getting back to mission, in his book, The Soul's Code, James Hillman describes the acorn theory, that each of us has a mission or set of missions inside us, and that, like an acorn, our mission needs care and a supportive environment to grow and emerge. He writes that each person bears a uniqueness that asks to be lived and that's already present before it can be lived. Well, isn't that a great image for the birth chart in astrology as well, which a lot of us describe as a map to our own unique potential and unfolding, emerging sense of self? All right, with that, let's take a quick look at an example for some inspiration and also just to see how you can apply some of these techniques. Now, this is the AA rated chart for activist David Hogg. By the way, AA means that we have a good birth time, and that's crucial to analyzing the angles of the chart, because if our time is off, our aspects to the angles might also be off, and we may even be wrong about the sign itself, and that's just going to throw off our whole interpretation. So analyzing the angles themselves is really going to work best when we have an accurate birth time. Now, I'm going to take you through a quick tour of all 4 keys using this chart, and we'll take in a few highlights rather than doing the full analysis. So just know there's a lot more we could say than what I'm going to say here. Hogg has his midheaven at 1 degree of Gemini. Now, this is a chart run in a quadrant system, so that arrow that's pointing to the top marks the MC as well as the start of the 10th house. Every archetypal field in astrology has multiple potentials, but one version of the Gemini MC, which is ruled by Mercury, says, I have a message. I have something to say. I have something to tell you that's really important, or I have something to learn. And these conversations are really important to me. Well, that really fits for Hogg, one of the survivors of the mass shooting that killed 17 students at his high school in Parkland, Florida in 2018. After seeing so much inaction in our country around this issue, these students were galvanized to do something. So they started a movement, and it became really successful. Now, for a movement to be as successful as theirs, leaders need to show up to inspire others and drive them to action, or the movement doesn't tend to get off the ground. And key number 2 shows us that Hogg has the sun in Aries in the 8th house, sextile Uranus. And this is a chart where the sun's a big part of the story, even though it's not in a tight major aspect to the MC, but we will see it becomes important in key number 4. And that raised fist gesture you see in this picture is a perfect example of Sun Uranus. But let's get back to the MC for a minute. The ruler of the MC is Mercury in Pisces in the 8th house. Mercury is also making a tight aspect to the MC, creating an even stronger connection between them. This is a sextile, and we'll call it out of sign because it's just a tiny bit away from being in Aries, which is the sign that's naturally sextile Gemini. Now that's not a problem, it just adds some nuance to our interpretation. The sextile is a stimulating, creative aspect, and in Pisces, Mercury's going to learn best and communicate best in a variety of ways that go beyond rote, linear learning. Mercury in Pisces might communicate from a place of emotional inspiration or connection to feeling. And that really fits Hogg, who's less of a sharp talker and gets his impact across more through feeling. This aspect shows up in some heavy-hitting poets, including another major figure from his generation, Amanda Gorman. Now, looking for aspects, we see that Neptune is trine the MC, and we might count that wide sextile from Venus as well, and maybe even the very wide sextile from the Moon. Neptune in aspect to the MC can describe somebody who's tapping into the collective consciousness and can then symbolically represent for those ideals in the collective, and Hogg certainly does that. Turning to key number 3, we see that he has Virgo rising, and so Mercury is the ruler of the Ascendant. Now that doesn't give us anything new here to interpret because we were already looking at Mercury as the ruler of the Midheaven, but we do see now that Mercury's doing double duty here, and that just tells us how important Mercury is in this chart. Well, now let's go on to the 4th key. Hogg has the Moon's South Node in Capricorn in the 5th house of children, among other things, and the North Node in Cancer in the 11th, which is a house of friends or groups of like-minded others. The South Node is ruled by Saturn, and the North Node is ruled by the Moon. Well, let's set all of that aside for today, though, and instead, let's focus on the planet that's squaring the nodes, which takes us back to his Sun. Being square the nodes suggests that his Sun hangs in the balance of his growth and development, and that focusing his attention there on the Sun will pay off over time if he becomes more conscious about how he uses that energy. This is someone who's meant to cultivate a healthy expression of ego. And in the 8th house, he's also likely to need to learn how to combine his energies and resources with others in order to achieve his goals. Being in Aries, he'll probably be more comfortable in a leadership role in those settings. If he was in a band, I'd steer him toward trying out as the lead singer or the band director. The South Node being in Capricorn speaks to a sometimes austere acceptance of responsibility and a need to learn to incorporate sensitivity, vulnerability, and self-care into the mix, and we're getting that from the North Node being in Cancer. So I'm struck by his answer to a question that a journalist asked him just after the shooting. And the journalist said, "Have you had time to grieve?" And he replied, "Well, I can't sit back and grieve while so many people are dying." Then the interviewer asked, "Well, what's the difference between the gun control efforts that you're involved in and previous attempts that haven't worked?" And he said, "We are young and we're not going to leave it to a generation of corrupt politicians to decide our future." Now, in addition to the Sun and Aries square the nodes, we see that he has a triple conjunction of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and they're also in aspect to nodes. But that triple conjunction, that combination, evokes fighting for one's beliefs, and in Taurus with perseverance, dedication, and tenacity also coming from Mars and Saturn in that mix. And he also said, "We've all lived through something horrific, but the strength and beauty and knowledge that we're going to win eventually is what keeps me going." To witness some of David Hogg's inspiring energy and drive yourself, look up the YouTube video of him at the March for Our Lives rally titled, "You Can Hear the People in Power Shaking." Well, that's it for today's lesson. If your curiosity's piqued about this subject and you want to learn more, check out my webinar, Mission in the Birth Chart, where I go through several more chart examples, including Jane Goodall, John Robbins, Coretta Scott King, Amy Tan, Aretha Franklin, and several more. But if you're ready for a deeper dive, join me and Brian Clark for our course, Vocation, Mission, and Calling, where we're going to read Brian's excellent book, Vocation, and then we'll apply these techniques through homework and exercises that are designed to help you work with the techniques so that you actually retain this information. If you join us live, you'll also get to ask any questions you have in person, in real time, online. And if you join us after the fact, there's a real-time discussion area inside the course portal where you can ask questions at any time. Well, thanks for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed this material, and until next time, take good care.